I'm Bill Bihar with Commercial Electronics. We have Carla Even here with Chula Vista Police Department. She will be doing the presentation today. So we will go ahead and turn this over to Carla and she can get started. Carla, go ahead.
Thanks, Bill. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you to everyone that's joined and taking the time to learn about what you've maybe already heard about, which is Live911. So I'm going to talk to you about how it's worked for me and for our agency. And I want to thank CEC for allowing me to be here. It was a last minute thing that I volunteered for. And I appreciate them very much for letting me share. It's something that I'm pretty passionate about and that I enjoy doing, is sharing my experience with Live911. So to introduce myself, my name is Carla Even, and I'm the Police Communications Manager for Chula Vista Police Department. I was dispatching for 20 years. 5 of those was as a working supervisor on the floor, taking calls, still working the radio. And then the last year has been the Police Communications Manager. And there's my contact information, which will also be at the end if you want to reach out to me. So Live911 came about when they wanted to figure out a way to kind of close the gap between the information that's coming into dispatch and the information that's going out to officers in the field. So it's a different way of dispatching, doesn't cause any interaction or any extra work for the dispatcher, which is great. That's a technology, though, that will transform the way that you dispatch. You live stream your 911 calls. We chose to only live stream our 911 calls, not the administrative lines. But we also have the option that when we recall a 911 hang up, because some of those are emergencies, that it will play that administrative line on the recall to officers as well. Allows the officers to have an improved response plan when they go out there. So they're going to base their response on everything that the caller said versus information previously that they were hearing from the dispatchers put in this situation where they have to hypothesize and synopsize what's happening, and let's shorten it and get it in the call, and then we'll shorten it a little more to go over the radio. It's also improved our response times for our agency. We had not met our priority 1 response threshold in a decade, which it was 6 minutes. So now we're at 5:58. So we're not saying that, statistically that it's solely because of Live911, but I can tell you that our staffing numbers are lower and crime has not decreased. It's increased. So it's definitely helped. And I've seen it firsthand when an officer's on scene of a call before we can even get the call into CAD. So I know for a fact that it's helping de-escalation. So we've all seen the news articles of, things that have happened out in the field, and they talk about dispatch priming and what did the dispatcher say is what they want to know now. So the officers are able to hear the caller and hear what they're saying so that they can de-escalate the situation before they even arrive on scene. And that could just be simply how they respond and approach. Saving lives. Our agency and many others have had amazing success with this life saving, especially on calls that are non-breathers, overdose, things like that. They'll be on scene. We had one recently 8 minutes before fire and medics arrived on a non-breather, which was incredible. We've also had on scene of a baby that had drowned, and just the hysterical caller that was calling in could not provide an address, which we could get through Live911. But before we could even transfer to medics for EMD and things like that, the officers are already driving there and almost on scene as we're transferring to medics. They're on scene before medics are on scene. So that's absolutely incredible. And then situational awareness, just getting the constant updates of what's going on and hearing all those details and background noise that we as dispatchers try so hard to capture and get on the call. For our officers in the field, we all kind of understand why they want it kind of like when they got their MDCs and they wanted to see what we were typing into CAD, and we didn't want them to see the MDCs because they would see the pending calls and they would jump calls, and we kind of get the same, fears when it comes to sharing our phone calls with the field units. At least I did. When my captain came to me and said, we're gonna give all the officers in the field access to Live911 because we're a program. My exact response to him was no, thank you. Didn't want the officers to hear what we were saying. I wasn't sure how, they were going to react to what they were hearing and what they were going to think about my dispatchers and how they were doing their job, and would there be complaints. So I kind of had a lot of fears, but I really should have just given my dispatchers a lot more credit, because we saw the opposite effect where the officers, within a couple of days, they're bringing up coffee and food, and they're like, oh my gosh, your dispatchers are amazing. They're sending me text messages at home. I just heard this call, and then they had to go to this next call, and can't believe this, that, what happened. They had no clue what it was they were doing. Kind of like when you're a dispatcher and you want the officers, like you want to send your dispatchers out in the field so they can understand how to support the officers. Same thing. They're now seeing what we're doing. So it changed like the working environment for the better, totally improved it. But the officers can hear everything, and not just what we put into the CAD and they're reading on their MDCs as they're trying to drive there, but they hear all of it. One of the most important things is the tone of voice. So they say like your tone of voice when you talk to somebody is 38% of communication. However, over the phone, that increases to 75 to 85% of your communication is tone of voice. And so for the officers to be able to hear that, instead of a dispatcher trying to explain to the officer, it sounds like they're maybe not telling the truth, or they sound suspicious, and you're trying to get them that, or you have the hysterical calls. And as a dispatcher, I would be like, could they get there already? Like, do they understand how bad it really is? And so now that they can hear it, we'll have officers in the field say, based on the Live911, I'm responding code 3. And so they'll drive lights and sirens because they're picking up that tone of voice of what's happening. It also helps to manage multiple active incidents. So we'll have 40 to 60 officers out in the field working different calls. And when you have one particular call that's getting updates, you're updating the CAD, and the primary dispatchers dispatching other calls, managing those incidents. Officers are going out on traffic and they're doing all those things, but you have two officers that are responding to one particular call that's now either escalated or suspect drove away. And when the officers are listening to those things, it's crucial that they're hearing it right when it happens, because the bad guy might be driving towards them or away from the location. So it's phenomenal handling multiple incidents at the same time. A little bit about the software. On the right, you can see what it looks like. On the left, you have the map that's like a satellite view. It drops a pin, a blue pin where your car is. It's integrated with Rapid SOS. At the top, you can see there's where the red X is, and there's little lines with the addresses. It shows you the calls that are coming in. So there's multiple 911 calls, and you can simply click on one of those to listen to the different ones. On the right is a zoomed out map, which will show you the incidents that are happening. It also shows you your officers in the field and their relation to the calls that are coming in. The officers in the field, it's not shown on this map, but they have like a little circle that's color coded. So by glancing at the screen, you can tell there's a 911 call coming in here. The officer nearby is in green, which means a go, and he's listening or she's listening to the call. Or if they're red, they're muted. So you could prompt them over the radio, there's a 911 call coming in, and they'll unmute. So they'll mute for different reasons, if they're talking to a citizen, or if they've muted a previous call and they've just left it on mute, but they want to see where the calls are dropping, but maybe not hear them because of the background noise, or they're new. So it'll show you right away. Also your supervisors, if they're muted, you can ask a sergeant to start monitoring a certain call. Doesn't require any interaction by the dispatchers, which is great. We don't have to click anything, do anything. It's just automatically happening. It shows you where your call is coming in from. So as you know, most of our calls are cell phone calls. So we might get in Vesta, our phone system, a Latin long or a general area, but the rapid SOS will drop us a pin within a couple of feet. So you can tell, you know, where they are hiding or where the person is. I say hiding because I had a female call in that had run away from her house. She was in a domestic violence situation. She ran down the block and was hiding next to a house. And she had no idea where she was, and it was dark outside, and she's whispering, and he's walking up and down the street looking for her. I could tell the address of the house she was at, which side of the house she was at. It was phenomenal. Officers can geofence their calls that they're hearing, and they can set up multiple geofences. So we ask them to set up like maybe a quarter mile of where they're at. And then they'll also set up their beat. So if we have different beat sectors, there'd be 11, 12, 13, 14 on the west side of our city. And you're beat 11 for that day, but you leave your beat to go cover on another beat. You can do a quarter mile of your location and then also beat 11, so that if something comes out in your area, you can know, like, I can clear from this call covering that person and I can go back, but you still hear what's going on around you. We talked about how you can identify who's listening, which is a great tool for us. Rewinding live audio. We don't use Higher Ground as our logger right now, just because we're in contract with another logger company. I don't know if that will change, but if you do, then you're able to rewind the audio. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I on that where they can join a call later, the field units, and they're able to fast forward and rewind as long as 911 is active, regardless if they're your logger company or not. Is that correct?
I'm sorry.
Yes. That's okay. I'm 99.9% sure that is correct. So sorry about that. Okay, so for leadership, for us, we talked about how patrol, we can ask them to monitor and listen to the calls. But for PSAPs and for dispatchers, it's a tool where I fell in love with it as a manager, which I was extremely hesitant because I wanted a quality assurance plan in place first. And I wasn't ready for it because it was within a couple of weeks of me being promoted. And so I was very nervous about what this change was going to do and how it was going to look. But as a manager, I started over the last year, like understanding that I don't have to worry about the field units and the citizens so much. The dispatchers worry about that. And that's what I did for 20 years. And as a manager, I worry about now my dispatchers, and I worry about my agency and the liability that we have. So this tool has been a layer of protection for all of us. I've seen things happen that have been caught because we have Live 911. And it could be something as simple as, you know, a typo on the location, and the field unit will say, confirming this location because I'm copying via Live 911 that it's at this location. And it's not a tool that we use for punitive reasons for our dispatchers. We just recognize that they might need a little bit more training and how to use Live 911. And that took maybe a month where we would just touch base with the dispatcher and let them know, like, you can see the caller's location and this is how you use it as far as the location. If they're telling you something different, reconfirm with them. Our supervisors can monitor the Live 911 calls. Right now, 43% of our staffing is 1 year or less on in dispatch. So we have a lot of new people. So the supervisors being able to monitor the 911 calls when a dispatcher gets stuck, or when you start hearing something in the room and you want to jump into the call, you can join and actively listen to the call if you need to. But prior, we were doing that through Vesta, and it plays in your headset and you use the ability to monitor the multiple radio stations, the room awareness, and all the calls that are happening in the room. Now it plays in the background. So if you hear something that triggers you as a supervisor, you can tune into that call and see, okay, we're getting a critical incident. I need to wonder what's going on. Our drone program, you don't need to have a drone to use Live911. We were using it initially with our drone program. Our drone operator was able to monitor the 911 calls, launch, and be on scene before we could get a call into the system. So they were able to tell us things about what was happening and different way of dispatching, but it was great. I mean, it was the same as if an officer went on scene and said, this is now what's happening, getting updates from the officer. We were getting some updates from the drone operator. You're able to identify hotspots when the 911 start coming in and there's a car accident or something. Okay, sorry about that. So the why. So since I've promoted as manager and the last year of civil unrest and things that are happening, there's a lot of news articles about what officers are doing in the field. And I'm noticing that now more than ever, they're also questioning, what are the dispatchers doing? We had a recent incident in San Diego, and when the activist came up on the television, on the news, he was asking for, one of the first things he said, I want the calls that came into dispatch, and I want the radio traffic of what the dispatcher said to the officers. They talk a lot about dispatch priming and how officers are exposed to some type of stimulus that comes from the dispatcher and how they word things. And it's putting our dispatchers at risk. There's just a different kind of liability now that falls on them. And one of the recent cases is the Kyle Plush case. And the things that were being said about the dispatcher and what happened is heartbreaking to me, because this kid was trapped in the backseat of the minivan and he ended up passing away, and they didn't find him for about 6 hours. Once the dispatch center got the call, it took him 4 minutes to find out his location and where he was. 3 minutes for the officers to arrive on scene, and officers were on scene for 11 minutes searching. While they were on scene during those 11 minutes, he called back in to dispatch on 911, and he gave the color, make, model of the vehicle that he was in the parking lot. And they did not have the Live911. It didn't drop a pin where he was at. And for some reason, the information that he had called in the second time with the description of the vehicle, that description of the vehicle was not relayed to officers in the field. So the news articles that started coming out were the dispatcher was wrong. He would be alive today, if they would have done things differently. And there was a wrongful death lawsuit. The judge ordered that it could proceed against the 5 Cincinnati employees. So as a dispatcher, we all know you can be sued personally, not just your agency, which to me is very, very scary. This family won $6 million in their settlement, and part of it was allocated to the dispatch center and ways to make improvement. And they talk about ways to make improvement, as far as training and things like that. But if the officers on scene had heard him call in and give a description of the vehicle, maybe they would have been able to find the vehicle. And I'm not saying anything bad about the dispatcher, because she didn't take that job to do anything wrong ever. She took the job because she wanted to help people. And that could have happened to me. I've made mistakes in my career, and this could happen to any dispatcher at any time. Next slide, please. So this slide I know has a lot of information on it as soon as it changes, but it's the scrutiny that dispatchers are facing now. And they talk about, you know, fixing policing, and they say start with a better 911 system. And they talk about, you know, the emphasis of what the dispatchers are doing and how it affects the officers and their decisions out in the field. The missing link in police reform is the 911 call takers. And they talk about being held accountable after someone was sent to the wrong house or the wrong location. If you Google these articles, there are so many, and I put a lot on this slide, which is a PowerPoint no, but just look them up. And I'm sure your inbox is being inundated like mine is with all the different things like, oh, dispatcher made a mistake and dispatchers did this. And almost every single one of them, if not every single one, I'm like, if they had Live 911, that wouldn't have happened. So next slide, please. This call here is about a teenager. His name was Jaden Chavez Silver, and he was shot in a drive-by shooting. When the person called in, they were saying he's barely breathing, and the dispatcher kept asking, "Is he breathing?" I told you he's barely breathing, and then they would ask a couple more questions. Is he breathing? And the person on the phone said, "I, with some profanity, already told you that he's barely breathing." And the dispatcher said, "You know what? I'm not going to listen to you talk to me like that," or however it was worded. You can deal with this yourself, and disconnected the phone. So when you have Live 911, if that's being streamed to officers in the field, they would hear that and they would know, I have somebody that's been shot and we need to respond. And you could also address the issue of hanging up on somebody. But for this to come about, and you don't know that this is even the first time it's happened. So you have the opportunity to know, like, I have a dispatcher that's stressed out, burned out, whatever it may be, that, you know, he chose to hang up on this person that was calling for help. It's out there. And I didn't include the video, but you can see what Nancy Gray says, and it's just horrible. Like the things that they say about the dispatchers, which to me is heartbreaking. Next slide, please. So I'm not here by any means to say like, oh, look, dispatchers are doing wrong here, 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 and here. It's already out there. It's on the news. We're seeing it. But I know that myself and every other dispatcher that's working in a comm center is doing it because they are driven by a desire to help people. They don't want to accidentally put in the wrong address. You know, they don't want to get frustrated. They don't want to forget to type something on a call or air information. They don't want to do that. They want to do everything really, really fast and really thorough and get it right every time. And this is a technology and a tool that helps us do exactly what we're already doing. It's not a replacement for a dispatcher, because the compassion that they provide to the people that are calling in, that can't be replaced with technology. We had a recent power outage at our comm center, and the dispatchers picked up pen, paper, and cell phones, and they continued to dispatch. So a portable radio that we had in the room because we had no power for a console radio, and they handle it. But when you have a technology that's vital and crucial to what you're already trying to do, that enhances the ability to get the information out there fast and get it all out there without you having to try to figure out like what's important, what's not important, did I get it all? Humanly, it's a hard thing to do. This quote that's on here is from our retired Captain Reber, and he came up with the idea of Live 911 in command college. And he did not know I was ever going to use this quote, but I think it's so important that people hear this, because I had sent him an article about some, you know, one of the many articles that I got, and said, hey, maybe it'd be worthwhile to reach out to this agency because they're having a little bit of difficulty or they had an error, and Live 911 could have helped. The technology is there, and to me, it becomes a missed opportunity that if it was there and it was implemented, it could have saved that person. And his response to me, worth reading, is also, this article is tragic but not uncommon. This type of article is great to send out with context and appropriate understanding for the agency and the dispatcher, but frankly, mistakes happen to everyone. And any system that limits the impact and frankly unfair pressure on dispatchers to get it right 100% of the time or people die is a value add and reduces liability and perhaps stress. And he's absolutely right in what he said. And I loved what he said, because this wasn't and isn't being implemented because they think we're doing something wrong. It's only to make it better. And it's not fair for the dispatchers who are so stressed out of like, am I going to make a mistake? And I used to go home at night and overthink what I had done during the day. And did I miss something? Did I say it wrong? Are the officers going to over respond or under respond? And that pressure that you have is incredible. And now you have, with us, the Live 911, it reduces that stress where you're like, they're hearing it. And if they're not, unmute so you can hear it. You need to hear what's happening so that you can make the most informed decision when you get on scene. Next slide, please. So again, having the officers make the most informed decision. I want them to make their decision based on what they're hearing over the phone, not based on what I put in the call. And then there's just this need to protect your dispatchers. When you see these articles, I've put in the wrong location myself on calls throughout the years I was dispatching. And it could have been based on, actually, I know it was based on what the person told me on the phone, or a typo that I entered the wrong street or selected the wrong street during address verification. So our job as managers and leaders is be open-minded. I encourage people to do that because I wasn't. And luckily I worked for an agency where they forced it upon me and said, no, we can do this. And they're so forward thinking that I was like, wow, like this is not a technology that, maybe we should have it, maybe we shouldn't. My dispatchers have said when agencies come through to see what we're doing, I would leave my headset swinging if they took this away from me. It's like telling them, we're going to take away CAD and you're going to go back to pen and paper. It's so crucial to see where your callers are, where your officers are in relation, and to have your officers have all the information as fast as not even humanly possible, but using technology to make it happen. Protecting your officers so that you don't have that one incident where we dispatched a call once of a lady that called in and said there's a man at the door with a gun and a hammer, and we dispatched multiple units, a sergeant, a canine, all of that, and that's what the officers hear over the radio. But they were listening to Live 911 and they were able to hear all the other things that weren't aired on the radio, which was, it's her son, he's 17 years old and she never saw a gun or a hammer. And she had called multiple times that day and they were arguing over him getting some kind of unemployment check that the mom kept and the son wanted back. So it was different than the words that came out over the radio. So protect your officers because they're going to go on scene based on what you're saying or based on what they're hearing. And protecting your agency. When you do have the dispatcher that's hanging up on people, you might be surprised because you might think that you don't, but you may. And protecting your agency with the wrong location. That's happened since we've implemented Live 911. And we've been able to immediately correct it when we hear from either a supervisor in the room or field units that this location is wrong. So huge protection for our agency that we didn't send officers to the wrong location. And protecting your citizens, showing up on the domestic violence calls, the overdose calls, the non-breather, the drowning baby, all of those things. A man with a gun, we had an officer responding to a different call and we get a Live 911 call of a man with a gun. He looks over in the parking lot and says, I see him standing right there. As soon as the live call was streaming, he was in the exact location at that time, looked over and saw the person. So you're able to get help to your citizens incredibly fast, on scene from the field. And one of the things that people have concerns about is officers jumping calls from the field when the officer does look over and sees the man with a gun or whatever it may be, and they're going to tell you from the other side, how does dispatch handle that? For us, it was implemented that the officers need to air what they're on, so the incident type, the location, and their unit number. So it kind of sounds like a traffic stop. So they would come up and say 211 John, show me on the live 911 call, man with a gun, 1100 Broadway. And then we would create, the primary radio dispatcher would create a call for service, because now the dispatcher knows what the officer's on and what they're doing. And then when the call taker does route their call, we associate the two in CAD. So they're linked together in CAD, and all the information is then on both calls. One call is then closed, and that also tracks our officers' response time, because it shows they're on scene immediately as it was not even aired but streamed to them. So for us, it's been opposite of what my fears and thoughts may have been with regards to officer and dispatcher relationships. It's only enhanced it, and there's a different level of respect. When before, the officers would, be upset, they'd go to a call and they'd be asking questions over the radio. Can you get the suspect description? Can you get the color of the car? Can you ask if there's weapons? And you're looking at the radio thinking, that's exactly what I'm doing. Like, I will get it to you as soon as I can. But now they're hearing it. So if a dispatcher does forget to ask something or gets frozen, they may come up with a question. But other than that, they wait, because they know that those questions are already being asked. So before, they would go out and they'd get on scene with minimal information, and they would, leave the call, and they would tell their other officer friends, like, wow, our dispatcher didn't even ask these questions, didn't get the information. Why am I being sent in blind? And now that they're hearing the calls, they're like, well, they did ask 7 times and the person wasn't providing it. So it's helped them be less frustrated with us as dispatchers, which has been great. So they'll bring up cookies and things like that, and like, oh, I heard you had this really bad call. They'll follow up with us and see how we're doing. So it's been a really positive change. And last slide, please. Well, second to last. So this slide here shows Tamir Rice and Denise Amberly. Both of them were inspirations for the development of this technology. Tamir Rice was the 12-year-old that was shot at the park, and not here to Monday morning quarterback anything, but when you listen to the call of the citizen calling in and saying there's somebody at a park with a gun. It looks like a kid. The gun looks like it's fake. I think it's a juvenile. Very calm tone of voice. And when it was aired, it was a man at the park pointing a gun at people. And it just, I don't know if that's part of the conversation about dispatch priming, where they say, just depending on the words and how they're aired is going to change how an officer reacts when they get out in the field, and what dispatchers say and do relate to and cause actions or inactions by field units. And again, that pressure should not be on a dispatcher. So would it have made a difference if they live streamed that call and they heard it? Would they have gone in thinking, okay, it could be a fake gun. Okay, it's maybe a kid. Maybe. And then Denise Amberly, she had been kidnapped. She was still alive at the time she was calling in on 911. 2 different counties in Florida were looking for her. Her father was a sergeant in one of the counties. So they had every officer in the field looking for her, helicopters. And she was driving past officers in the vehicle calling 911. And she eventually was raped and murdered, and they were not able to get help. The information of her calling in was not relayed to field units. And then Kyle Plush, we had talked about him, and there's so many pictures that I wanted to put on this slide that I know if they had Live 911 at that agency, the officers would have heard it and things could have been different. So just, I appreciate everyone being open-minded and being willing to listen, because as leaders, it's important that we do what's best for our citizens, for our officers, for our dispatchers, and for our agency. And it's not going to be an easy thing to do, because, change is hard. And it's kind of like when officers got their body worn cameras and they wanted to see everything and hear everything the officers were doing. A lot of them were like, no, thank you. And it's almost offensive at times, or whatever it may be. But this is not. This is added. Like, so many officers have been protected because they have their body worn camera, and that's what this does. And I equate it to that because all your stuff is going to be out there, and all you're going to realize is that my dispatchers are doing the right thing. And if they're not, then there's a training opportunity. And if it's something horrific, then you deal with that as well. But you're going to realize that they are doing the right thing. And it's just going to help them get the information out fast and accurate. And that is all I have.
Okay, Carla, thank you very, very much. Very informative. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat area. As Carla had mentioned earlier, she came on at a last minute to help us out with this presentation due to Beth English, who was supposed to do it, but she had an emergency come up and was not able to help out. So if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. And we also have, do we have any questions so far?
Bill, while you're waiting for those to come through the chat,
Yes.
I noticed the last slide did not have your contact information that was added to the to my presentation. Would you mind adding the contact information into the chat in case anyone, yours and for commercial electronics? Okay. And then also my information was on the original slide, but if you need my information, if you want to come out and see our comm center and what we're doing, if you want to call me for a sample protocol, or you have any other questions that come up, you can reach me via email or on the phone. I'm happy to have conversations with anybody about it. And just again, thank you for being open-minded enough to hear a little bit of how it works.
Then we will end this presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. You all have a great day.